One of the most heavily used components on the mountain bike are your hubs. I mean, have you ever actually considered how much abuse these things go through? They're constantly revolving every time you ride a bike. They have to put up with all the strain and the torque and the power that you put through them. And of course the opposite when you're using the brakes. As a result, there's loads of different components and layouts available on hubs to suit different styles of riding and riders. So today, we're going to be looking at everything to do with the mountain bike hub. We teamed up with DT Swiss to make this video because DT offer a huge range of hubs. In fact, they're one of the biggest suppliers to bike manufacturers out there, and it's a good chance that one of your bikes will have DT hubs on it as standard equipment. Now DT offer 3 different models of hub, the 180, the 240 and the 350. And between those 3 models of hub, there's 114 configurations you can have with different rotor mounts, axle widths, all that sort of stuff. But in this video today, we're going to be looking at hubs and the technology involved in them and how you can get the most from them to suit your style of riding. Let's start off though by having an overview of a hub first so you know all the terminology. Okay, so we're going to use a rear hub for this just because it has a few more components than the front hub. Now the first piece you want to look at is the main body of the hub, sometimes known as the shell of the hub. And you'll notice it's got these 2 ridges here. These are the flanges and they are what supports the spokes in order to build the wheel. Now there's 2 types of flange. You get these ones, which are the traditional style that support J-bend spokes. And you get ones like this that look a bit more intricate and they support straight pull style spokes. Now at the end of the hub, you have the disc rotor mount. Of course, back in the day, you wouldn't have had these at all on hubs, but virtually every mountain bike now will have the capability to have disc brakes on, which means you'll have a disc rotor mount on your hub. This one is the 6-bolt, but there's also the center lock system like this one that uses a single threaded splined interface. Then you have on one side of the hub, which will be your rider's right side when you look down, you have where your cassette screws onto the cassette body. There's a few varieties that we're going to move on to later in the video. And then you have the end caps and the axle that runs through it. Axle comes in various different standards and there's 2 major varieties of end caps. These ones literally pull off, you don't need any tools, but yours might thread on, requiring some spanners. Okay, so in reverse, having a quick look at the hubs, the 350 I want to talk about first. So this is a great value hub and you'll see this offered on loads of their wheel sets and probably on loads of the wheel sets that are available on bikes that you might already have. Now this is available in all the options essentially. There's 52 different options available with this single hub. So they're away from 130 grams for the front hub upwards. They're available with center lock or with 6-bolt. They're available with straight pull spokes or with J-bend spokes. And of course, all of the different free hub offerings on there. 52 models in that, quite incredible. Next up is the 240. So this one is the mid-range hub. Again, you'll see this on loads of their pre-built wheels. Now there's 58 models available in this, again with the same sorts of offerings as the 350. This one's a bit lighter, so you're going to start seeing this creeping onto slightly better wheels. But again, you can have it in straight pull, you can have it in J-bend, you can have it in 6-bolt, you can have it in center lock, and of course you can have it with XD driver, micro spline, or the old style spline. And you can have it in a variety of different axle standards, all the way up to 157mm Super Boost. Quite insane, again, the amount of different offerings on there. And last up is the 180. So this is the flagship hub. It's available in loads of cool colors. In fact, there's a new oil slick version that's out on the market. I think it might be limited edition. So there's 4 different models available in this, so only the 4. They're available with the different free hub bodies on there, so micro spline and XD driver. They all have straight pull spokes and they all have center lock system, and they all also have ceramic bearings. So if you want the ultimate in lightness and efficiency, this is where you want to go because these start at just 94 grams for the hub. Okay, so let's start looking at the individual parts of the rear hub itself. Now let's talk about the brake mount first because there's 2 major varieties. Now the most common one by far will be the standard 6-bolt system. Requiring a disc, I mean it's okay to touch this with bare hands because this one is knackered with a 6-bolt fitting. This is the most common option and you'll see this across all brands available on the market, and you probably have this design on your bike. Now a little bit about the 6-bolt system. So you use 6 bolts obviously to hold it in place, and they're usually Torx T25 heads. You know, sometimes you might see 4mm Allen key heads, but the Torx is the common interface here. Now it's highly recommended to use a medium strength thread locker here. That's commonly a blue one. Never use the high strength red stuff on these. The bolts are very easy to round out and of course you will need to remove them at some point. But don't be tempted to not use any thread lock here because these are subject to vibration and of course it's your brake. If they start getting loose, not only can your disc actually come out, but what I have seen in the past, the bolts break, leaving parts of the thread actually inside the insert here, or worse, pulling the thread straight out of your hub, in which case you may well need a new hub afterwards. So make sure you pay attention to your mounting system and just check them from time to time. Now the other option available on the market is the center lock system. Now this is slightly less common. This was started by Shimano initially, but there are some other brands starting to use this system on the market. It uses a splined interface with one set of threads which are much bigger, so arguably it could be a better system for use in the future. It also uses an existing tool for use on hubs. Use a standard cassette tool in order to actually mount the system in place. Super easy to use, literally the disc will just slide in place and you have that locking ring which you tighten up using a torque wrench really to make sure that's nice and safe. Again, if you have center lock on your bike, definitely from time to time check these are tight. Same thing applies, even though this is an insanely secure system, it could still rattle loose with use. So on your wheels, you'll have two types of different spokes available, straight pull and J-bend. Now let's talk a little bit about J-bend spokes first, because they are the most common option and they're the most traditional offering available. The hub itself will be a traditional offering like this with regular flanges on. So lacing up a J-bend spoke, a little bit trickier because of the fact you need to take a bit more care. And when it comes to replacing spokes, you're going to need to either remove the cassette or remove the disc rotor depending on which side. Now J-bend spokes are the most common, which is a good thing. It means if you break a spoke and you're somewhere remote, the nearest bike shop more than likely will have spokes that are going to fit your bike. If not, they could be cut down and re-threaded at the bottom in order to fit your bike. You won't necessarily get that with straight pull spokes. However, J-bend spokes do have a slight weak point, which is the actual bend itself. But that said, being devil's advocate, I can't honestly remember the last time I broke a spoke, let alone broke one on the actual J-bend. Okay, so on to straight pull spokes, and you could argue that they're slightly simplified as far as building the wheels goes, thanks to the way the aligned holes on the hubs allow you to essentially just drop the spokes in and they'll go to the correct place basically. You could also argue that for replacing a spoke on location, they're a bit more convenient. Because of the fact that they got those aligned holes as part of the hub, you might not need to remove the disc rotor or the cassette in order to get access to drop that spoke in. It's not always the case, but it's a lot easier than it is with J-bend spokes to replace one. However, this can come at a price because of the fact the hubs are a bit more intricate in the way that they're machined, so the hubs themselves can cost a bit more. So let's talk about the design of the spoke, because there's a few different options available. You get straight gauge, you get butted, double butted, triple butted, and even bladed options. Now, butting refers to removing material from the spoke, effectively feeling like it has more material in different places for strength and removing material to save weight. So for example, a triple butted spoke would be nice and thin in the middle to take that weight away, but it would still retain a good amount of material at both the nipple end and at the J-bend or at the hub end for strength and rigidity. A triple butted spoke would be ideal for a cross-country racer, for example, whereas a straight gauge spoke with more material on it all the way along, which will be much stiffer and stronger, would arguably be better for like a free rider or a gravity focused rider such as a downhill racer. There's also bladed spokes, which you could argue offer a slight aero advantage, but we're going to ignore that for mountain biking. But there's something else that they can offer, which is why they are seen on some mountain bike wheels. Across the length of the blade, you're going to get immense stiffness fore and aft, which means great for putting the power down when you're putting all that torque through a wheel, especially on the back wheel, but also fantastic under braking. So for example, you could have fewer spokes, and if you had bladed spokes, you could essentially have a wheel that offers the similar properties to one with more spokes in a regular format. Another advantage of bladed spokes are they have lateral flex. Now we're not talking about literally banding around. A small amount of flex makes the wheel feel slightly more compliant. So if you're running a very stiff rim, let's say a carbon fiber rim, you can have a slightly more responsive feel to them by using aero spokes. So there's a lot that can be done with wheels and hubs to tune the way that the wheels are going to feel. And now down to the amount of spokes that you're going to use and how the spokes cross over on the wheels. So typically on pre-built wheels, you'll see 28, 32 and 36 hole offerings. Now 36 would be better for dirt jumping, downhill gravity, that sort of thing. The more spokes, the stronger the wheel essentially is going to be. And then a cross-country rider or a lightweight trail rider might want 28 spokes, for example, saving a bit of weight where it's not needed on the bike. However, you can get down to 20 spokes on some specific bespoke wheels, and some wheels, like our 20-inch friends on BMX bikes, can go up to 48. So it's possible to have an immensely strong wheel, completely full of spokes. It could be opposite end of the spectrum. But it's not just the amount of spokes that correlate to making a wheel strong. The rim has to be the correct design for this. A wider rim will always be stronger and stiffer, and with a wider, stronger, stiffer rim, you could therefore use less spokes in order to achieve the same effect. But there's also the way that they're actually laced up. You get 2-cross, you get radial, 3-cross and 4-cross designs. Now 4-cross isn't really seen that much in mountain biking due to the fact it's a lot of work to build the wheel and it uses a much longer spoke. Longer spokes equals more weight. The most common option you're going to see, and it's probably what's on your bikes, is the 3-cross style. So the telltale way to see what yours are is look where the spoke comes out of the hub. You see, in this case it goes around 2 spokes here and then goes the opposite way around the next one. So it's 1, 2, 3 crosses before it goes into the rim itself. This is ideal because it gives loads of strength. All the spokes work together. It's a lacing system. So the spokes work under tension. And essentially that's how you get a really strong wheel and you keep it as light as possible. And as you might imagine, for a 2-cross, instead of crossing 3, it just crosses 2 spokes, which means slightly less rigidity in there. And for a radial, the spoke literally comes straight out, just like you would see on radial spoked cars. Same exact principle. Okay, so a little bit of information about the axle systems on hubs. Now we'll talk about the front hub first. Traditionally, front hubs used to measure 100mm from axle to axle, and they used to have a quick release on there. So many of you might still be using those on your bikes. But there could also be options available with up to a 20mm axle that went through there, sometimes held on with Allen keys, sometimes with some format of a quick release axle that went through there. These days, it's slightly wider at the front end, it's 110mm, just to compensate for just a wider bracing angle, more clearance for bigger tyres and that sort of stuff. And you'll typically see a 15mm axle system like this with some kind of lever on there to secure it, although not always the case. Sometimes you might secure it with an Allen key, which would be a slightly simplified version of the same thing. 110mm standard is known as boost, and we also have boost on the rear of the bike, but a boost on the rear is 148mm from end to end, and the axle you tend to go through the middle will be a 12mm axle, much like the one at the front end of the bike, and it will have a lever to secure it in place. But it wasn't always this way. We started out with 135mm distance between the axles at the rear, and they were always quick release style systems. So you might still have one on your bike, perhaps if you've got a 7-speed system on the rear. But then as frames and technology advanced, essentially there was more gears to go on the back end of bikes, and frame manufacturers had to grow the rear ends of the bikes proportionally. And we moved up to 142mm, but now, like I said, 148 boost is pretty much where the market is. Downhill bikes though are even wider. They're 157mm apart to really accentuate that bracing angle and to keep the back end as wide as possible for a strong stance on that frame. We are starting to see though this 157mm width creeping in on some enduro bikes under the name Super Boost. Now with virtually all modern hubs, we have the advantage of having cartridge bearings on the inside. And because of this, the hub designs can be quite smart and even tool-free. So DT hubs are known for being able to take apart without any tools at all, which is perfect for maintaining the hubs. And basically you don't have any excuse for not looking after the internals of your hubs. It's so simple to look after and a far cry from what hubs used to be. So on older style hubs, you'd have an axle that screwed it in place and had cup and cone bearings which needed constant maintenance, seemingly every weekend from what I remember. And to do that, you needed a selection of annoyingly different sized cone spanners just to do that one job. But thankfully with modern hubs, they are far easier to put back together yourself, quite often not needing tools at all, as is the case with these hubs. Brilliant stuff and no excuse for not maintaining them. Now there's 3 different options of free hub body available for virtually all hubs on the market. So the most common one that you'll still see today is the classic splined offering, which thankfully is starting to be moved aside by better offerings from both SRAM and Shimano. Now yes, these work absolutely fine as long as you look after them. But one of the problems with these is if you're putting a lot of load through, let's just say you've got an e-bike, or if you race 4-cross, or if you're a road rider, track riding, things like that, where you're putting so much power and torque through these bodies, certain cassette designs can actually score these delicate splines, and actually they've been known to actually slide straight through them if you're not careful and you don't maintain these. So if you've got one of these systems, you want to check it from time to time, because certain cassettes, the ones that come apart into multiple components, when you slide them on, they can cut their way into these bodies. So actually, in the long term, it's not the best solution, which is why Shimano and SRAM went their different ways to develop different systems. So Shimano developed the micro spline, which is basically a modern day version of that. So not only does it allow for gears up to 12 speed, but it has a much better connection, and it can't slip, can't get damaged at all. So that is really future-proofed. And SRAM also, who actually went to this style system first with the XD driver body. So again, their take on it, slightly different, gives you the same effect, but both of them are excellent systems and definitely where the future is headed. Okay, so now there's the engagement system on your hub. So you know when you're pedaling along, you're engaged, and when you're freewheeling, it disengages. That's where you hear that cool freewheel sound. Now there's two major styles of how this actually works on the inside. Now the first is the older system. So these use pawls, which are, I guess you could say, they're pivoted tongues that are sprung, and they have a ratchet ring, in which case they engage into it. So in one direction, they will move out of the way and pass by. In the other direction, they spring into place and engage into the teeth. Now the key to this system working well is maintenance, because as soon as these get gunked up, they have different types of springs. Some have like a leaf spring, some have a retainer spring, some have little mini coil springs to push them out into place. As soon as these get gunked up, they don't do their job and they can slip. So although it works well and there's not much friction in the system, maintenance is key with the pawl system. You don't want these to slip when you're going to pedal and it actually gives way. It feels pretty nasty when that happens. Now, these days you do tend to see the pawl style system on more budget offerings, but not because it's a cheaper or an inferior system. It's just because it's been around for so long. So all of the vendors in the big factories, they've got all the tooling to make this stuff. So it's very common. And actually, you do see these still on a lot of cross-country hubs because of the fact you can set them up with minimal friction in the system. And now onto the ratchet system. So this arguably is the better system on the market. DT uses basically in all of their hubs, and actually you can aftermarket upgrade even a pawl hub to accept these, and there's various options available. But the cool thing about the ratchets themselves are they're always partially engaged, and due to the way that the teeth work on them, as soon as you pedal they actually pull themselves in, so they cannot slip. Now to move them apart again, they're sprung. You get some designs that have a single spring, some designs that have a double spring set up on there, depending on which model of hub you have. Now the EXP system in this cross-country hub basically is a little bit simplified and it's quite cool. So one of the ratchets is actually a bearing retainer, so it doubles up as a bearing retainer in the hub, so there's less components in the hub, which of course saves weight. So DT offer four major systems here. So there's the 18 teeth option, which is the common one. You'll see this on all of the entry-level hubs and on many of the hubs on a lot of the bikes you'll be riding. And there's 20 degrees between the pickup here, so that's free movement before the hub engages as you go to pedal the bike. This hub here actually has 36 teeth on the inside, which is like 10 degrees. So that's half the amount of movement before it actually engages. So that's super fast. But they also offer a 54, and that's just 6.6 degrees between pickups. So that's like barely any movement. If you work out 6.6 degrees on the grand scheme of things, that's near enough instantaneous when you're pedaling. So why would you want the difference between say 20 degrees and 6.6 degrees? Because they're dramatically different in the way they ride. So for the 6.6 degrees, let's put yourself in the mindset of a cross-country racer. The second you move your cranks, you want that power to go straight into the hub and straight to the rear wheel. It's all about forward propulsion. It's the most important thing. But if your bike has loads of rear wheel travel, loads of suspension on the back, there's a good chance it's going to have an amount of chain growth on there. This is just what happens when the wheel moves through the travel, the chain effectively grows, and you can feel this through the pedals. Now, if you have a 6.6 degree rotation hub on there and your bike has lots of chain growth on there, you're going to suffer this. You're going to be feeling the pedals effectively tugging backwards very slightly as the bike moves through that travel. Now, this phenomenon is known as kickback, and you can lessen the effect of this by having a hub with less pickup. So for example, that 18 tooth with the 20 degrees might be much better on your suspension bike than the 6.6 degrees with that 54 tooth. Now, as far as hub servicing goes, really keeping them nice and clean is the first thing that you should be doing. You should definitely be checking your disc rotor mount, whether you've got the center lock system or if you've got the 6-bolt system. always check. That is a safety thing, you must check that. From time to time, give your rear wheel a little wobble and see, or your front wheel, and see if there's any play. If there's play in the system, your bearings could be knackered and it's time to replace those. Now, unless you've got all the specific tooling, things like this, you're probably going to have a trip to a bike shop so they can punch out the bearings for you and get those replaced, but it's worth doing to keep everything running sweet. But really, the only maintenance you need to be doing yourself is on the actual mechanism on the inside, which is really easy to get to on a number of hubs. Now, if your bike has the ratchet rings, again, keep them clean, use a small amount of the special grease on the inside there. If your bike has the pawl system on there, be a bit more cautious when you pull it apart, because some of them can be known to just fly out, and once they fly out, you won't see those again and you'll need to buy a spare part. So it can be a bit of a pain, so do take care with that. As long as you keep the systems running smoothly with the correct grease or a nice thin grease, they'll work brilliantly for many years to come. Well, hopefully that's everything you need to know about hubs. Talk to you a little bit about maintaining your hubs, the upgrades you can make to them, and of course, understanding which ones might be the best options for you. If you're a heavy duty rider hitting bike parks and rock gardens, you don't want that super lightweight 28 hole set of hubs, do you? And likewise, if your bike has loads of suspension travel and possible chain growth, you don't want the super fast 6.5 degree pickup that you can get on some hubs that cross-country racers love. And if you've got any more questions, or if you've got any questions about hubs at all and the way that they work, please do hit us up in the comments underneath there. And as always, thanks for watching. See you in the next video. See you later.